Hey everybody, Questwise here. Today, I want to do a comparison video of a couple of different games based upon their exemplification of the genre that they're trying to portray. First and foremost, I have to say, I have to preface this whole video by saying, if you don't know this about me, I love pulp. I love pulp fiction, everything from Edgar Rice Burroughs to Robert E. Howard, Jules Verne. I love the pulp genre. I have always been fascinated by the aspect of the anywhere from the 1920s to the 1930s Indiana Jones-esque sort of adventure fiction movies, flying zeppelins, weird science, the occult, any of that kind of stuff. I've always been fascinated by those kinds of things, and today I'm going to focus on two games that do the same thing, that focus entirely upon the pulp genre. First and foremost is going to be Pulp Cthulhu. This is a supplement for the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition role-playing game that focuses mainly on the 1930s and everything pulp. The second game is Hollow Earth Expedition. This is put out by Exile Studios, uses the Ubiquity system, and again, focuses very much on the 1930s style of pulp. Let's start with Hollow Earth Expedition. I've had this game for a very, very long time. I purchased it from a friend who was moving away and was kind of whittling down his collection a bit. Thank you, Wayne. I've only gotten to play it maybe once or twice, so I cannot say I'm an expert on the Ubiquity system, but I find it interesting. The Ubiquity system is also used in other games such as All for One Regime Diabolique, which there's some great videos on that over on Runeslinger's page, as well as Ivan Mike 1968's page. They've done a whole series of games based on the All for One Regime Diabolique RPG, which also uses the Ubiquity system. The Hollow Earth Expedition does as well too. So let's start with this game. And what I want to do is I want to kind of compare not so much the game systems, because they are different and they are very unique, different game systems. And I don't want to talk about any of that today. If you already own the games, then you know the differences between the game systems. What I want to focus on today is how each of them exemplifies the pulp genre. And when I come to the end, I'll try to tell you my thoughts on whether or not I think which one of them does it better. But let's start with the Hollow Earth Expedition. This is probably one of the most beautiful books I own, as far as like, not so much just construction, but like, because it's a very sturdy book. It's hardcover. It's, decently thick. It's got the sewn binding and glued and everything. So that the construction of the book is great, but the artwork itself is really what exemplifies this book for me, and what captures the pulp genre for me. The cover itself with the big, mining drill tank that's come out of the surface, the capturing of the characters here, and this giant dinosaur rushing in from that other thing. But the interior art into this is amazing as well too, and just some great examples of some of that. Let's see what else. There's some. This is all of its. 95% of it is all sort of just black and white line drawing. Okay? But there's a few, color plates in here as well, too, on some of the characters, archetype templates. So there's, something akin to this. But the artwork itself, I think, very much lends itself to the pulp genre beautifully, because it captures that sort of pulp magazine, weird tales, Strand magazine sort of type of artwork. It exemplifies that very, very well. And it kind of puts you into that mood, into that sort of ambiance of that time period of when the pulp magazines were huge, when those things were the king of the markets, and you can find them in any sort of dime novel type things. So the artwork of that it nails it for me, and it's like I said, probably one of the most beautiful RPGs I have that I own that has that sort of style of art in it. So that's a big thumbs up for that on there. It has a wonderful use of space, and by that I mean it doesn't put anything to waste at all. On the very inside of the cover is printed a giant world map. I mean, this is right inside the cover. So there's no sort of just wasted space in there as well, which is a very, very nice key. It is cover to cover full of things that exemplify the game and push the game forward for me. There's a very short, it's like a one-page section on what pulp is, and it's very short, but it's a very concise description on what pulp is. There's a decent gazetteer of the 1930s, and it covers the entire of the world and what's going on in different places around the world in the 1930s. Gives you a nice little brief feel of what, if you want to play in South America, you want to play in Central Asia, gives you just a brief description of what's happening in the during the 1930s in those different countries. Having said that, while it's cool to have that, because of space constrictions, it's a little bit, I wish there were more. I wish there was some more, and maybe it would be cool to have this sort of a supplement that was just a gazetteer of the world at that time period in the 1930s, to give you a little bit more of a better description. But I think that's the genius of this game and of Pulp Cthulhu, is that they give you just enough of a teaser. And since you're playing in a historical period, go do the damn research yourself. There's Google, there's anything. You can find these resources out there and what other things are going on in the 1930s. And so I think the teaser is kind of nice, and it kind of promotes the game master to want to go out there and do some research into further readings and whatever else is going on in that time period, to give your players a more richer experience. Again, just to mention, it uses the Ubiquity system, which is a system in which you roll. You're building a dice pool, and you roll. It doesn't matter what kind of die type that you use. It could be a D4, it could be a D20, it could be a D6. You're going to want to roll them all, and you can choose if you want to use, like, say, evens are successes, odds are failures. You can do 50-50. You could do, like 1, 2. If you're using a D6, it could be 1, 2, 3s are failures, 4, 5, 6s are successes. You want to be consistent, whatever die method you use, but that's the basics of it. You're building a pool of dice, and you're trying to look for successes over failures. That's the Ubiquity system in a nutshell. Very nice. There's a very nice equipment section in here. In Hollow Earth Expedition, or HEX as it's sometimes called amongst the fan base. The equipment section is very nice. It's very well displayed. It's very well thought out. It's very thorough. The downside to it is that anything sort of pulpy, say like weird science, psychic powers, limited down to 1 page. There's a great GM section in here, a great Game Master section in here that gives you advice on how to run adventures and gives you some great adventure hooks, which is always really nice. There's a section completely on the Hollow Earth itself, how to get there, what it's like inside there. Because the game is called Hollow Earth Expedition, the main focus of the game is the Hollow Earth, the interior, this lost, forgotten world. It's been written about by many, many different pulp writers of that time period. That the idea that the Earth is hollow and that the inside of it is this lost continent, this lost world full of craziness, everything from, think King Kong to dinosaurs, crazy weird science, Nazis. There's always Nazis. That's great. But it focuses, because the game is called Hollow Earth Expedition, it does focus a lot on the Hollow Earth. And so there's a great section on how to get there and how to use it and what's there when you get there. There's a very full bestiary and an enemy section. Gives you some NPCs to use as villains. An amazing section on different types of creatures, from saber-toothed tigers to giant apes to just everything regular, wolves, snakes, and then a plethora of different dinosaurs that you'll encounter as well too. And then there's the very end of the book, there's a sample adventure and a page full of 2 pages full of suggested readings that you can read, or movies and stuff to watch that kind of give you the pulp feeling. So that's the Hollow Earth Expedition. Next up is Pulp Cthulhu. This is fairly new. It's only a couple of years old, maybe, if that. It's very new to me. I've just finished flipping through it and reading through much of the thing. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm leaning a little bit more biased towards Pulp Cthulhu and the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu rules, just because I'm a really, really big fan of them. I love the game system itself. I have a degree in history, so I love that sort of like historical basis of the Call of Cthulhu game. I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft's writings, so that gives me a little bit of a push in that direction as well too. But let me tell you about what this book does that sort of that it does by itself, and then what it does kind of in comparison to Hollow Earth Expedition. So first off, it has very nice artwork. It's very evocative of the Lovecraftian style. It's all full color, which is great. I love that I love that every page has sort of like a sepia tone to it, and there's a little bit of a background, be it like a water stain or some kind of an ink drop or whatever in the background, and there's like little runes along each side of the page, which gives it a nice Lovecraftian feel. And a lot of the artwork does feel pulpy, but because Hollow Earth Expedition did it in the sort of line drawing style of the original pulps, kind of get to give the artwork score to Hollow Earth Expedition. Pulp Cthulhu has some great art, and all of the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu books have some amazing art. But again, because of the style that Hollow Earth Expedition did in that sort of line drawing type thing, I got to give the artwork nod to Hollow Earth Expedition. There are 4 full pages of pulp history in Pulp Cthulhu, and I love this book because of it. And let me show you what I'm talking about. It goes into great detail about the pulp genre and the pulp magazines and the pulp novels of the time. And it does it very, very well. And it gives you a very, very nice history of what the pulp genre was and how... and this is just a history. It doesn't really tell you how to, how to use it as in a pulp type game. It just gives you a history on the pulp magazines and the pulp of that time. So for people who don't understand what pulp is, and so it's a very nice introduction to that. If you want to know more about pulp, you don't know what pulp magazines were or the pulp era, go Google it. Just put in pulp stories of the 1930s, or what is pulp fiction, not the movie, what pulp fiction was in the 30s, and they'll give you there's a great Wikipedia article on what that was. So 4 full pages of pulp history. This sort of replaces the Investigator's Handbook. So if you have 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, what this does is it sort of replaces the it replaces the Investigator's Handbook and gives you the pulp thing. It used mostly the rules from 7th edition, so there's not really a lot of changes. It just gives you a little difference in character creation and how characters are built in order to exemplify the pulp genre. There's a small section on magic and psychic powers and weird science in here. Again, I wish I would have seen more weird science, and I felt that way with the with the Hollow Earth Expedition as well too. For a game that's exemplifying pulp, I feel like they both kind of shorted the stick on weird science and stuff itself. This one does give you some psychic powers, which is kind of nice, but again, it's like 1 page of ideas. And it refers always back to Call of Cthulhu as when it refers to magic and stuff as well too. Which Call of Cthulhu has an amazing magic section. Hollow Earth Expedition, not so much. It uses the Call of Cthulhu rules, which is the percentile system or the D100 system. I find that system very, very intuitive. I've always found it very likable. The more and more I get into it, the more and more I really, really love that system. To me, it just makes sense. The whole percentile idea of if you want to climb it, and I've used this example through dozens of my other videos. If you have a 50% chance of climbing a wall, you can kind of in your head kind of say, hey, this might not be a good idea, or it might be a good idea to try and do, or how can I help myself get a better chance into doing whatever action it is I want to do. So I love the percentile system. I think it's very intuitive, and I think it works really, really well, especially in this pulp type of setting. So I'm a big fan of that. This has an amazing Gazetteer. The only drawback to it is it's mostly focused on the United States in the 1930s, with a very small section on what's going on in the rest of the world. So very U.S. central focused. What it does really, really well, and what it does above and beyond Hollow Earth Expedition, is it provides some really, and it does this in the Investigator's Handbook for 7th edition as well of Call of Cthulhu. It really, really, really digs into the meat of the setting itself. There are sidebars that give you slang from the 1930s. There are a list of movies that were produced at the time, the ideas of what fashion was like, what men and women would wear, what people were driving, what kind of medical practices were being used, on and on and on. Call of Cthulhu, it's such a great section in both Pulp Cthulhu and in the regular Investigator's Handbook on capturing the era of what's going on, who's important in the time period. In the 1920s, it gives you complete listings of like Al Capone and Nikola Tesla, and I mean just a bevy of great stuff. Love Call of Cthulhu for that kind of thing. If you're ever in wonder about what's going on in the 1920s and 1930s or whatever, it's got a full section on exactly what's happening. What kind of shoes men were wearing at that time. What kind of cars were they driving. Amazing. Thumbs up to these guys over at Chaosium and providing something like that and just fitting it all into the book very well. Has a great section on villains and a bestiary. Again, it kind of refers you back to Call of Cthulhu because it's a Hollow Earth Expedition was sort of focused on the Hollow Earth. Call of Cthulhu is based upon Cthulhu-type monsters and the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft's writings. So we have sort of a special focus in different directions, but they both do it very, very well in their respective genres approach. One of the great things about Pulp Cthulhu, instead of having one adventure like Hollow Earth Expedition, there are 4 introductory scenarios in this one book. What more could you ask for? I mean, that's amazing. 4 different scenarios that get you kind of in the mood of the pulp in the 1930s. So what are my thoughts? Who wins this battle? Who exemplifies it best? It's hard to say. Chaosium has the market just, arrowed in, very on target when it comes to Cthulhu mythos, whether you're playing traditionally in the 1920s or modern day or in the 1930s in Pulp Cthulhu, or any time period in history. They have that so fine-tuned in and dialed in on the Cthulhu mythos and that sort of horror exemplification of H.P. Lovecraft's writings. I got to give it to them in that respect. Hollow Earth Expedition, on the other hand, doing a very pulpy game in a very pulpy setting, such as the Hollow Earth, they've got it narrowed in on that. They've got it targeted perfectly to that aspect of that kind of thing. So it really comes down to now you could run Hollow Earth in a Pulp Cthulhu game. You could totally go to the Hollow Earth in Pulp Cthulhu. And you could also totally weave in Cthulhu mythos and the occult and cultists and all that crazy stuff in the Hollow Earth Expedition. In fact, there's a section in there on cults and stuff and cult leaders. But each game does it respectively very, very well. I think it comes down to you can't really divide it by pulp genre because they both do it very, very well. I think what it comes down to is simply a personal choice on game mechanics. I didn't want it to come down to this, and through the entire creation of this video, I fought with myself internally on which one was better, and I just think it comes down to a preference on the game mechanics. Do you like the ubiquity system, or do you like the percentile system of Chaosium better? And folks, that's what it comes down to. Totally what that it comes down to. So that's up to you. That's up to you to judge and decide on what works best for you in the pulp genre. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're a fan of the pulp and that type of genre and stuff, please, I'd love to have some conversations with you about it. I love to talk pulp, and I love to talk pulp literature as well as pulp games and stuff. But let me know your thoughts. Which one do you like better? Throw them in the comments down below. I'll put a link to both of the websites down there as well too. And I say, if you're going to play a game, play it well. So until next time, I'm Questwise, and we're out.